Hi, everybody. My name is Stuart Warren. I'm the managing editor for Sequart organization. I'm here today with another exciting Patreon exclusive hangout for all of you that donate so generously to us to keep Sequart running and operating. Today, joining me is Dr. Julian Darius and Cody Walker. And today we'll be talking about Planetary. So if you have any questions throughout the Hangout, please submit them to me during the course of the Hangout through our Q&A app, and I will be able to forward your questions to Julian and Cody towards the end of the Hangout. So I'm going to turn this over to Julian and Cody, and I wanted to thank you guys again for giving so generously to us, and you make this all possible. Very thankful for you guys. So here's Julian and Cody. I give it to you guys. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Yeah, I'm doing well as well.
Cool.
So we're here to talk about Keeping the World Strange, a planetary guide, which I have right here. And this was edited and spearheaded by Cody Walker, who we'll get to talk with. So Cody, maybe you can start with talking about kind of your love of Planetary and how the project got started.
Yeah, I started working with Mike. Man, I think it was like in 2010 or something like that. I just started editing freelance, and after I saw like kind of the different books that were coming out from Sequart, or the different things that were going to come out from Sequart, I was thinking about, well, what could I do to kind of be a part of it as well, in addition to just editing. And so I just had the idea of like, well, Planetary is one thing that hadn't really been discussed. We hadn't Sequart at that time hadn't done any Warren Ellis books or anything like that. And Planetary is just my all-time favorite Warren Ellis work. I don't know, I just like it better than everything else. And so I kind of had the idea of how I wanted to do it. I wasn't really ready to write a whole book by myself, and so because of that, I thought, well, in addition to not wanting to write a book by myself, I thought it'd be a good idea to go and get people from, like, just different writers to contribute to it. Because since Planetary is all about like different genres, I thought that different writers could kind of contribute to that feel of the different genres that are in the book. And also, I think the Watchmen book, like Minutes to Midnight, did like, I think I just edited it or something like that. I don't know that it was out yet. And so so I pitched it to Mike. I came up with a bunch of different just rough ideas of what I wanted and what kind of essays that I wanted. And so we sent that out to a whole bunch of different essayists. And the one thing I thought was really funny was that I was actually the fourth person to pitch a Planetary book. There was a couple others before me. There was somebody else who had written a bunch of stuff. And so I remember Mike saying to me, like, "You're the fourth man!" I'm like, "Ah!" I'm very academic, serious, and professional. But anyway, and so yeah, that was kind of how the whole thing came about in terms of pitching it, and it like going out to different essayists and stuff like that. So.
Well, were you happy with the essays that came in, and how they fit your needs for addressing all those different genres?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'll be honest. I mean, I don't think it's a perfect book. I think that there's some things that I think that there's room for more essays in it. But I mean, we used every one that we had. It's not like we cut anybody out or anything like that. Everybody that pitched got in. And I don't know. I think that there's a lot of really good different perspectives. It's not exactly kind of what I envisioned, because what I'd thought of was it being sort of a this is a book about genre, and this is how Planetary deals with genres and things like that. And it didn't really turn into that, but that's okay, because what it turned into, I mean, there's a lot of really great essays in there anyway. But I think that Ross Payton's essay on monsters and like monster books, I think, is really solid. I think Caleb Stokes's essay about futurism and like stuff like that, I think is really great too. But I mean, there's a lot of really good essays. I mean, I haven't read it in a while, and so it's hard to like say like, oh, like, I mean, I'll forget tons of people if I go down that path. Those are just the two that stuck out because they're friends of mine and I know them and stuff like that. And so, but yeah.
Well, what did you write about for the book?
I wrote about how it fits within the Wildstorm universe, because what I liked about Planetary is that, like, I mean, in the pitch, if you read Ellis's pitch, he talks about how this has to be a part of the Wildstorm universe. It must be a secret history of the Wildstorm universe. And then in the end, there's like maybe 3-4 references to other Wildstorm stuff. It's mostly it can exist on its own ultimately. I mean, there's just a few little peppered references. But then it got me thinking is that, I mean, if it is a part of the Wildstorm universe, it's Wildstorm history, well, what does that mean about the Wildstorm universe in general? And it's really interesting to think about, like the idea that, there was a golden age. The Silver Age was stopped by basically Fantastic Four analogs that murdered every other Silver Age, like trope.
Yeah.
And that's just interesting. I think that that's just incredibly interesting to think of. And then the fact that Wildstorm didn't do anything with that. That it was exclusively, if you didn't read Planetary, you never would have got it. And I guess it was hinted at a little bit. If you read his Stormwatch, there's like little references and stuff like that too, to like a larger narrative. But for the most part, you just don't get you don't really get much more than Planetary in my mind. So
yeah, there's a little bit of it in the Authority, and if I remember correctly, the original idea was more that this was going to create the Wildstorm Golden Age. That, if Wildstorm had kind of started in the early 90s with sort of the rise of Image and everything, there wasn't a lot of, backstory. And here you're going to get this massive downloaded backstory. And it just seems like the story took on its own proportions. And what's interesting is like it starts kind of like really grounded in the Wildstorm universe in a way. Like the earlier issues are like, okay, here's the first issue, right? It's like, here's the Wildstorm Golden Age. And by the end, it's just totally, I mean, of course, because of the delays and the Wildstorm universe having changed, by the end, it's just totally incompatible with the Wildstorm universe.
Right, yeah. And it's, they probably had some sort of deal with Ellis that like they can't use any of the characters he created, like the drummer or like Chiquita or anything like that. But because I mean you just don't see them literally anywhere else. But I think that's such a wasted opportunity, because it's like they could, I don't know, there could have been so much more done. It could have been so great, And now with the New 52, it's like we will literally never get anything like that ever again. We had our one shot and then it's over. So,
yeah, and I mean, I don't know. It's interesting that with the New 52, I mean, it's strange because even before the New 52, everything, the whole Planetary story, because it ends with such radical kind of transformation of the world. I mean, it doesn't really live in the Wildstorm universe anymore. No. And the Wildstorm universe had changed. I mean, the Authority took over America, and there was a revolution, and none of that is in Planetary,
No.
So it does not make any sense. And then with the New 52, I mean, none of that stuff is in continuity anyway. So I hadn't heard that maybe there was a deal with Warren that they wouldn't use these characters.
I could be like making it up. I mean, I thought I remember reading a thing though where he had said that they're his and that they can't really be used anywhere else. But I mean, then again, I thought Maureen O'Hara had been dead for like 10 years and she died yesterday. So I mean, I have no idea. You know?
Yeah, I see that on Facebook sometimes. This sort of parallel universe theory of
Yeah.
I was sure this person died or whatever.
Berenstain Bears.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the Berenstain Bears.
Yeah. Also here's another one real quick. And I know we're going off on a huge tangent at this point, but that's just the way I roll. So the movie starring Brad Pitt and Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise. It's written by Anne Rice. What's the name of that movie?
Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with what? One more time.
The Vampire.
Oh, okay. It's everyone I've talked to. It's Interview with a Vampire. You're the first person I've talked to that actually has the title right. It's Interview with the Vampire. But it pisses me off because like there's more than one vampire. Like how can you say it's the vampire? It's a vampire.
Well, so. The thing there was that the Anne Rice book, the vampire was I think his name is Louis. And, he's the one being interviewed by I think it's the Christian Slater character in the film. Yeah. And, like, Lestat wasn't really the goal, right? I mean, he was just this bad guy who comes in and out of the narrative. But by the time they made the movie, like, the next novel is, like, the vampire Lestat. And then, like, Lestat is the main character. So, yeah, I mean, originally it was kind of like he's a secondary character, but he takes over. I mean, but to get back to Planetary, it's like this is,
segue!
But I mean, this is like how narratives change as you add to them, right? I mean, and it's really clear that in the history of Planetary, I mean, the comic changed from its original conception, and it changed pretty radically. I think another way that it changed is and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, is that it kind of started out as a much more modest proposal. I mean, it kind of started out as, here's another Wildstorm book that explores, sort of the golden age that hasn't been told, the secret history of Wildstorm. And by the end, it's kind of a superhero art book, which is just like, let Warren do what he wants, let Cassidy do what he wants, they're superstars, this comic is historic, let them do what they want, and, it's this kind of weird art book that takes in all these different genres, and every issue is, like, totally different than the past issues and can go in these super weird directions. And it seems like it started as just like, okay, here's my idea to help the Wildstorm universe and be a team player, and here's my idea for something that'll sell, because at the time, Stormwatch hadn't sold. And I think the Authority and Planetary pitches were really kind of, in some ways, Warren sort of trying to apologize for those low sales and try to figure out what the market wanted.
Yeah. See, I feel like after issue 12, Planetary, I mean, it takes a very sharp turn after that, and I feel like those first 12 issues are so perfect that everything after that just sort of pales in comparison. And now that's not to say that there are no good issues after 12, because there's a lot of really good moments, but I don't feel like they're as solid, because what happens is that after, I mean, issues like 1 through 12, you sort of have one-issue narratives, and then after 12, it's like, well, here's a little bit of genre for about 10 pages, and now we got to get back to the main mystery for 12, And I felt like that sort of made a weaker book in some ways, instead of being like, a complete narrative that's a one and done that still has some sort of continuity. Instead, it's like he's just trying to juggle two different ideas. He wants two different books at that point, which is one about genre, but then also one that has continuity to it. And I guess a way to compare it is because it is comparable to X-Files. I think even in the pitch he mentioned something where it's sort of like X-Files. It's like X-Files with genre. And so if you think of the first 12 issues as being like, the best episodes of X-Files, where you have, a mystery, but also like there's some continuity. Like, just imagine an episode of X-Files in which half an hour is here's the mystery, and then here's another half hour where we're just dealing with conspiracy stuff. Like, we're dealing with, like, cigarette smoking man, we're dealing with, like, the bees and stuff like that. And so I feel like it, like, that's kind of what happens with Planetary. It's just a half and half thing, so.
Well, I mean, that's the difference between, like, it's talked about on the X-Files as, like, the mythology elements, versus sort of monster of the week stuff.
Right.
And, I mean, I was actually thinking of, like, Doctor Who, right? Like, you have, the sort of, like, monster of the week stuff, but then especially in the current show, and especially under Moffat, you have, like, the ongoing narrative. And, it really does seem like after 12, I mean, the central conflict of the premise is essentially resolved, right? I mean, this is the fourth man. We know who the fourth man is, and we're not going to draw out that mystery forever, which, you can respect as a narrative choice, right? I mean...
Yeah, but one thing about the fourth man thing, too, is that I never really felt like... and I think Chad Nevitt talks about it in the book, is that it's not really much of a mystery either, I mean, Ellis never really seeded along any suspects at all. I mean, you really had to take the time to read into who the suspects might possibly be. I can't remember who, because there was one, I can't remember her name. It was like Fu Manchu's daughter. I mean, the Fu Manchu analog's daughter. They're like, well, she might be it. I'm like, you don't even see her in the book. Like, they just sort of casually mention her. And so it's hard to say that anybody in that book could have been the fourth man other than Elijah Snow. I mean, even Elijah Snow, you just kind of go, oh, okay, I guess he is. Whatever,
Yeah, and getting back to that difference between sort of like the first half, the first 12 issues, and the second half, which ends up being, I guess, 15 issues. And I like a lot of stuff in the second half. I mean, I love the two-part Rendezvous with Rama stuff, but I'm a huge Arthur C. Clarke fan,
Right, yeah, that was pretty.
Yeah, and I just really dug it. But, yeah, I mean, getting back to that, like, it's really clear, at least to me, that, like, the original concept of the Four in issue 6, it's just another throwaway issue, right? I mean, it's just like, here's the Silver Age, and it's kind of rushed. Like, I mean, one thing I've been thinking about recently is how we never really get in Planetary the, like, details of how they've stolen all this technology and killed all these other superheroes. You kind of get it, like, in a few pages in 6, in between just we're going into the Four's version of the Baxter Building.
Right.
But, you never get, like, the Planetary side series or something that's just like, here's what it actually looked like and felt like.
Right. Yeah, and it's so funny. I feel so bad. I feel like all I'm doing is trashing this book, and like I love it so much. I really do. But yeah, it's I think maybe part of it is, and this is something that I'm sure I thought of before, but I'm just coming back to this thought now, is that maybe the book is not really, I mean, the book's not really about mystery, it's not really about development, it's more about just, like, kinetic, cool shit happening, that you just want to see cool shit happen on the page, and Ellis does that in spades, but Ellis and Cassidy, because Cassidy's artwork is so kinetic that it's beautiful to look at, but it's just so interesting to think about is that, there's all these things about what we want it to be or what we think it is, but in the end, it's ultimately just a good-looking book that has some cool ideas, but it doesn't really develop anything very well, I mean, I honestly,
you're like, I don't want to sound like I'm trashing the book too much, but like the concluding sentence is it doesn't really develop anything well.
No. Like, think of it this way: is that like if you even think about how the conflicts are resolved, how Elijah Snow ends up like defeating the Four is he just kind of does. He's just like he just did it. There's no real struggle. There's no real the conflict.
Well, there's a little bit of a struggle, but I mean it's like but okay, my thing with that was like, I mean, I agree with you that like I think what's interesting about Planetary is most of what people remember, and they're just like, "Oh, this is such an awesome comic," you know.
Right.
I mean, it bucked the trend of like, long form storytelling and
Right.
having a little bit of the mythology, but every issue was a different genre, was a different story. It even had a different logo every issue. You know,
Right.
I mean, it was so different. And yeah, most of the stuff that people cite is really from those first 12 issues.
Right.
But I mean, my problem with the ending is just like it's really one issue. I mean, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, you've removed a couple of the players, like the Thing analog, but then it's like it just seems so easy. It just seems to take place over the course of a single issue, and you're kind of like, well, I mean, of course, we waited like 8 years to get
Yeah.
there, so of
Yeah.
course it's got a little bit of a letdown.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and even like the final issue, it's
Hmm.
like, oh well, we've cured all diseases and poverty has been eliminated, and you don't really need to see how we did it. We just did it, and now we got to bring back Ambrose Chase, and yeah, it's really not all that hard. Nobody's lost anything, and everything's okay, and.
Yeah.
And again, I actually don't have a problem with that. Like, the more I think about it, like, it is what it is. And it at least it looks pretty, and the sciencey stuff is reasonably sciencey enough that I go, oh, all right, yeah, that makes sense, whatever. So.
Well, I mean, I agree with you about all of that. I mean, I guess what I would say about that final issue is that, what you said is like, Planetary really lives beyond all of the kind of like cool stuff and exploding stuff with every genre and seeing dinosaurs and Rendezvous with Rama and all this stuff. I mean, Planetary is just really beautiful to look at, and you said something about how it's kind of like emotionally an emotional experience. And I think that final issue, Ellis kind of says like, okay, at the end of the day, Planetary is really about this family of characters.
Right.
And let's bring it back to this family of characters. And if we're saving, if we're saving everyone in these stories and we're saving history, what about saving, the missing man there?
Right.
And so, I mean, I think it works on that kind of just emotional level. But it's kind of like Alan Moore's ending of Miracle Man. It's like, what do you do after this?
Right. Well, and I don't know. I mean, again, it sounds like I'm trashing the book, and not really. Like, it's still satisfying. It's still a really satisfying book, and I would sit down and read it right now. I mean, and still thoroughly enjoy it and love it because, it's just a delightful, enjoyable experience. It's just fun to read. It's a fast read. It just makes you feel, I don't know, it just makes you feel better by the end of it. There's something cathartic about it, and and I guess it's a book that's just full of cool moments. There's just cool shit always happening, like.
Yeah.
I mean, the issue where you have like the Lone Ranger analog connected to the Green Hornet analog. It's just like it's like, oh, that's like history. I mean, he's taking like the real life history of how those characters are actually connected and putting them in a fictional history, and it's like, that's awesome. That's so cool, and there's nothing else like it. I don't know that there will be anything else that could be like it, because anything else would just draw comparisons. I mean,
right.
And going back to the idea of expectations too, is it reminds me of, in some ways, of Brian Michael Bendis whenever he started Powers. The first arc on Powers is Who Killed Retro Girl, and after that, he doesn't really do a whole lot of detective stuff after that. It's just sort of like, this is the world and this is what it looks like. And I remember people saying, well, why don't you go back to that detective stuff? And Bendis responded, well, that was never what the book was about. I mean, that was what the first arc was about, but that's never what this whole book was supposed to be. And so, we have sort of these expectations of what something should be, and so we force ourselves upon those expectations, and we sometimes judge them based upon like whether or not they fulfilled our expectations or not. And it's like,
Right.
you know, this Planetary was originally a book about archaeologist superheroes. Well, they're not really archaeologists after issue 12, hardly at all. So are
Right.
we, you know, should we be upset that every single issue they're not unearthing something else? Or should we just be like, well, you can only do that for so long, you know? I mean, without it getting super repetitive. So I mean, I guess it makes sense for that shift in the middle, but man, I mean, you know, like you think about like the giant ants. I think that's like issue 7 or something like that. Like Zero. It's like such a perfect issue. It's emotionally satisfying. It does the architecture, or not architect, excuse me, the archaeologist motif. Does it really well. And it hits on a genre that nerds love, is giant monsters, it's like 50s beautiful wonderfulness, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I love, you know, sort of 50s era, and I love you know, B movie sci-fi. And you know what, I mean, one of the things that's so cool about Planetary is not only its kind of like radical incorporation of all these elements and fitting them into a kind of family tree that reflects their, you know, publication history as opposed to, you know, in continuity history, but also it's like unapologetic embrace of stuff like giant ants, you know, which Cassidy draws the hell out of. I mean,
Right.
he's a big reason why the book was such a spectacular success.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know, I love the marriage of how no idea is a bad idea. All ideas can exist in the same universe, and not look ridiculous. You know, I mean, you know, issue one takes something that everyone can, in my mind, everyone can love unequivocally, is just pulp heroes. You know, and it's like, that easily fits within that universe, and it, you know, you don't question the idea that there could be like a Doc Savage analog in the Wildstorm universe. And then issue 2, it's like, hey, giant Godzilla monsters all lived on this island. And while you should probably conceivably go, well, that's stupid, that doesn't make any sense, you know, how do we go from one thing to next? Like, you don't. You just go, yeah, of course, giant Godzilla monsters, like, why wouldn't they exist, you know? And issue 3, Tokyo Ghost Cop, sure, Tokyo Revenge Ghost Cop, like, you know.
Hong Kong action movies, you know.
Yeah, it's like, it's astonishing that all of those genres could exist so effortlessly, and that you don't even question it while you're reading it. You just love it and enjoy it, and it tests Cassidy to make it all look so good, you know.
No, I agree completely, and that's what I think about the giant ant. It's like, you know, you think about that and you think, you know, this is really risky. And it's true that, you know, by that point, like, you know, we're talking after Grant Morrison's GLA, and, you know, I mean, sort of like there was this turn back to just kind of like fun comics and, you know, let it be silly. But, you know, at the same time, you think the giant ant issue could have so easily failed. I mean, it could have so easily been a disaster, and just, you know, you had people on message boards saying, you know, Planetary has jumped the shark, you know, Warren Ellis has lost his mind, you know. I mean, it could so easily have happened. And instead, as you say, I mean, it works, and Warren Ellis also keeps it emotionally grounded. I mean, he always has some kind of like hook with, like, you know, a twist, or, you know, an emotional beat with the character they've met and how it relates to the main characters or something. You know, that kind of keeps the issue grounded in a way.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Well, and you know, I think that. You know, what about the influence of Planetary? I mean, obviously, it's had a lot of influence in terms of, you know, resurrections of these pulp heroes. When I see, like, you know, I mean, Dynamite doing Green Hornet, and, you know, all this stuff. I mean, there have been a lot of miniseries and events over the years with kind of golden age superheroes coming back, including, you know, sort of Doc Savage, and there's been a real kind of renaissance of this stuff. That's certainly been a big influence.
Yeah, I don't know. One thing that I think bothers me a bit is that it in a way was ushering in a new type of superhero book that that hasn't really been capitalized on since. You know, is that um, I feel like a lot of superhero books now don't take the risks that Planetary was willing to make. Um, Certainly, the idea of a single issue comics is hardly ever done.
Yeah.
You know, that's basically dead in mainstream superhero books at the very least. You know, I mean, Marvel and DC are not going to do just single issue comics. You know, everything's got to be a part of a 6-issue arc, or can at least fit very very neatly into trade paperback. You know, I mean, I guess you do see certain books, you know, like Batgirl. The current Batgirl stuff is more or less one and done stuff, but it's still continuity. It still falls into a 6-issue arc thing, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, I
Well,
also
I mean, do you think there's been like a regression there? Because like when Planetary came out, that was the case too.
yeah.
You know, I mean, and like Tom Strong, you know, was also in his early issues doing single issue stuff.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, it does seem, I think you're right, and I haven't really thought about this, that, you know, there has been a kind of like regression to everything's got to be 12 issue sweeping sagas.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that's really strange too is that even though things are shifting to like or things are in like a 6 to 12 issue sweeping saga type format, you don't have people spending a lot of time on runs anymore. I don't feel like Scott Snyder's the only one that I can think of that, you know, I mean, has had a 50. Well, he's going to have at least a 50-issue run on Batman, probably longer than that. But
Mm-hmm.
you know, and Bendis just recently left X-Men, but it's really hard in my mind to find like I don't know that people spend the time on a book or like it used to be, I guess, in some ways. I sound so old, I guess.
Well, that's been a theme of these hangouts.
Jeff Johns on Green Lantern for 8 years. Like,
Are you mocking me here in my Tim Callahan interview? It's okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean that's been a theme of just kind of like as you get older, especially as a superhero reader, there does seem to be this kind of trend of like at first everything is new, and after 5 to 10 years or something, you know, you're kind of like, you know, if not burned out, at least like, you know, I've seen it all. I know this history. This is a little new, but you know, you see kids like loving it and saying it's the most genius new thing, and you kind of think like, what the hell are you talking about? It's good, but
yeah.
it's not the second coming, you know?
Well, and like I love a lot of comics. I mean, I still read tons of comics, and so I mean, the observation of you don't really get the length of arcs that you used to really isn't stemming from like a disdain for anything at all. It's just an observation of that I don't feel like you get, you know. I mean, Ellis told like a 27 issue like major storyline, you know, and I don't know that you really. I may be full of crap though. The more I think about it, because you know, Hickman's Avengers was exceptionally long and an epic thing that took. I mean, it took place over, you know, different series, and yeah, never mind. I take it back. Maybe,
well, I mean,
maybe
I will tell you
ending, you know, and so we're just getting new stuff, you know. So,
well, I mean, I will say one difference tends to be that, you know, since Planetary, comics have gotten a lot more editorially driven.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a little less true at Marvel, where, you know, it's still true there, but I mean, they have these summits for X-Men or the Avengers, and they're plotting out the next crossover. But I mean, like with something like Hickman's work, it's clear that, you know, Hickman's got, you know, a lot of free reign, maybe not total free reign, but, you know, and other books have to fall in line, but, you know, not so dramatically that, you know, they're totally sideswiped as much as maybe some of the old days. But really, Ellis was operating I mean, a few things about Planetary. I mean, Ellis was operating. First of all, nobody knew him. I mean, some people like us might have known him from, some of his other work from Stormwatch, but Stormwatch was really under the radar. And he had done like Ruins and some other, an issue of Batman, and and some. But I mean, he wasn't a superstar, and a lot of people didn't really know him. Cassaday, same thing. And you look at Cassaday's pre-Planetary work, and it looks different. I mean, he really, starting with issue 1, even number 0 looks different.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, so, I think that, so first of all, Ellis was hungry. Ellis wanted to do something different, and he was operating under Wildstorm, which basically would let him do what he want. I mean, they were supporting Stormwatch, even though it really didn't sell. And supposedly, I mean, that was part of his authority pitch, was trying to do right by Wildstorm. So, I mean, first of all, he was hungry, and secondly, he was operating in an editorial environment where he had so much free reign and so much liberty and support. And even after Wildstorm went to DC, Wildstorm had a lot of free reign to do what they wanted versus the DC universe. And of course, that era has changed. I mean, we're just in a very editorially driven, especially with these properties being, movie franchise properties and on TV and everything else. It just seems like you can't, do many books like that at Marvel or DC that are kind of under the radar, where somebody's like, sure, let Alan Moore do whatever he wants on Swamp Thing. I mean, that book's going underwater, right? Let Warren Ellis do whatever he wants on Planetary. I mean, it's Wildstorm. I mean,
yeah, I think that one thing that we see now too is that instead of it being about like let someone do whatever they want and experiment, it's just easier just to cancel a book. Is that we don't need that anymore. It's not selling, so let's just drop it. And if we want to relaunch it with the right writer at a different time, we will. But because like if you look at like all the Suicide Squad, it launched in the New 52. It was canceled. I mean, it had a good run, and then it was canceled, and then almost immediately got a new number 1 again. And it's like, why don't you just hand that off to a different writer? It's like it's so strange to see to kind of see that. But then again, you have like Jeff Lemire's Green Arrow, or Batgirl, of course, is the prototypical example now of continuing the numbering and giving people the thing. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I hate those relaunches, and when you say like continuing in the numbering, I don't think there's a single comic at Marvel or DC that's legitimately over like number 50. I mean, even those Marvel renumbers, but it's still volume 8 or something, and it's really has not had 400 issues. I mean, it's had 20. So I mean, that kind of longevity isn't there the way it used to be.
Yeah, and I don't. Part of that is just. I mean, all that just has to do with sales, of course. Is that the reason why number 1s work is because people buy number 1s. And so it's an easy way to generate sales, and I don't know. I mean, I feel like in some ways that kind of contributes to Planetary, is that Planetary was just its own thing, and then it was just over. It's not like it wasn't going to be an ongoing series after Ellis left or anything like that. And if you think about his authority was pretty similar in a lot of ways. Is that you just do these kind of kinetic, fast like books, or at least fast storylines and stuff, and after he left, then they might as well just given it a new number 1 with Miller on there, because it just seemed,
Well, I mean, I think like the authority is a little different, because I mean, I think the idea of having Mark Miller follow for 12 issues and handing it off to somebody else, hopefully who he picked for 12 issues, and as kind of similar format, that was a really cool idea. I mean, it's kind of like an art book idea. It's like, it's actually pretty avant-garde, and I think that could have worked had the Mark Miller stuff not been dynamited, by 9/11 and editorial interference, and
Well,
that was an example.
it was relaunched too
Yeah.
after Miller left, right? They relaunched
Yeah.
it again, #1 again. So
Yeah, they did #1, and then those guys were on for like 15 issues, and they relaunched it as a miniseries, and
right,
but all the energy left by then.
Right.
I mean, the difference with Planetary is that both Planetary and the Authority were huge hits right out of the gate.
right,
So like it's true that writers and artists aren't given time to really develop their plans,
right.
but Ellis just hit gold, and I think it's amazing now, kind of looking back. And I still love Ellis's work. I mean, I read Trees, and I love it. But and I think Ellis sometimes gets falsely pegged with sort of like the guy peaked in 2000 or something,
Right.
And I don't think that's really true. But his reputation does rest to a great degree on Transmet, The Authority, and Planetary. And I was thinking of the same thing for Cassidy. That Cassidy's done. Obviously, he did like Captain America while Planetary was going on. He's done several other things since. Nothing has kind of reached that level of Planetary.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Cassidy's problem is that he can't do a monthly book for a very long time. Is that he's just not quite fast enough to do like a I don't know, like a Greg Capullo Batman run or something like that. Like he can
Yeah.
because he relaunched Star Wars with Jason Aaron and made sold just an ungodly amount of copies of that. And he did it for 6 issues, and there at the end, I think issue 6 might have been late, but they were gorgeous. I mean, I hate Star Wars. I mean, I vehemently hate Star Wars, and so for me to read Jason Aaron's Star Wars and John Cassidy's, it was a really huge step for me. But they are
well,
gorgeous.
You're maturing, Cody.
No, it's that I just love Jason Aaron because
I do too, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, he's from Kansas City, and he's the nicest person. I was going to be on it just for Jason Aaron, but when I saw Cassidy was on there too, it's like, well, this is kind of a no-brainer. I feel like I have to read this.
Well, but I mean, the Star Wars thing kind of gets at what you were saying. Like, personally, I don't really care if a book is late. I mean, I don't want it to be 5 years late, but I don't care if a book comes out monthly. I mean, I'm so done with like, find out what Superman's doing this month. I mean, that was cool when I was 16, but I mean, I'd much rather have a book that you can put on the bookshelves forever and just be like, that's Planetary. That's awesome.
Well, I mean, and I feel like though, like if that was an Image book, had it been like a strictly Image book, sure, you could justify that, and that's not a big deal. But
yeah,
when it's coming from Wildstorm, which was supposed to be, which was a wing of DC Comics, where you've got to get books out on time. It's just part of the job. I feel like that was something that was just really frustrating, and I just don't think that we live in that era anymore. I mean, at least from the big 2 publishers, is that, I mean, Marvel and DC very much are we've got to get this stuff out on time now. DC more than Marvel, I guess, because here you have that Uncanny X-Men 600 that took like 3 or 4 months to get done or whatever. But,
well, I don't give Marvel credit. Like, I mean, they're doing Secret Wars now, and just like Civil War, I mean, this is a big crossover event.
Yeah.
But when they got to do a delay, they delay, and they know that's got to delay the entire line because they don't want to spoil events in the main crossover. But they delay it anyway because they're thinking about the trade paperback. Now, I wish they were really thinking about, like, will people read this in 50 years? But I'm a scholar and a nerd, But, I mean, they're thinking in commercial interests, but at least that commercial interest is focused on the trade, whereas DC has, for at least 10 years, been focused on the single issue and worry about the trade later. And they have some weird trade collections that are just like, why is this stuff in there,
Right. This is on subject. This is on subject, but I'm afraid I'm gonna forget it. So it's a little out of the nowhere. When Planetary is when Keeping the World Strange was finished, and we had like put it all together and stuff. And I think I might have gotten my copies. I found Warren Ellis on Facebook, and I sent him a message, and I said, "Hi, my name is Cody Walker. I'm the editor of Keeping the World Strange Planetary Guide, through Sequart and stuff like that." And so I was trying to friend him on Facebook, like stupidly. I just thought it'd be funny. And so he responded and said, "I wish you all the best with your book, but I will never read it."
Yeah.
And I responded, "Can I use that for a quote for the back of the book?" And his response was, "Ha! No!" And that's the last thing he ever said to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's Warren's. That's really kind of been Warren's attitude toward all of our books about him. I mean, we've done 4 books about him. We did a movie about him, and I mean, if you watch like the uncut interviews with Warren for that movie, I mean, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I mean, several times he responds like, "Yeah, I don't think that's innovative. In fact, I don't know why you're interviewing me." You know? It's like, of course that stuff doesn't make the final cut of the movie. But, I mean, he's a very modest man, and I think he also, some of it might be that he, that he doesn't want to, I mean, it's a little weird as an author to read a book about yourself, or to read a biography. And so some of it might be that modesty. I mean, some of it might also be a kind of appreciation of critical distance that kind of like, writers are insecure, and, you write this stuff monthly, and, you hope it's good and you care about it, but at the end of the day, you wrote it, and, it's a little weird to have, critics pawing over it for the next 30 years, and you think, I wrote that, over the course of a week, because I was watching some B-monster movies or something, It can be, there's a little respecting of that critical distance that I kind of respect, that he has that viewpoint.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, I mean, totally. It was one of those that after, I mean, it never bothered me, but I thought afterward, too, I thought, yeah, I mean, should I ever write any, like, strict fiction or anything like that, and someone would write something about it, I don't know that I would actually want to read about it either. Like, look how wrong you were on the things that you have said to me. So,
I was gonna break in and go to some questions. I have a few questions here that I can fire at you guys, and also, to any viewers out there, there's a question and answer app built into the Hangout. If you would like to ask any questions of Julian and Cody right now, just type your question there and send it forward. You should be able to do it, and I can forward these questions on as the moderator. So the first question I have for you guys is on the issue of genre and Planetary. With the whole multiversity experiment that Grant Morrison did recently, do you see sort of this study of genre coming back into comic books if that idea is pursued? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I personally don't think that we will see, like, we'll never see, at least anytime soon, like a monthly book that is put out by, DC or Marvel that is of a radically different genre. I don't think that they have any interest in alternate takes on their particular stable of characters or anything like that. I mean, you have a multiverse of opportunities in which you could have any number of alternate takes on Superman or Batman or any character, and other than novelties like, say, like Spider-Verse or something like that, I think that they want to continue interacting with sort of their main stable, that they have no interest in genre beyond what they already put out,
And then as a follow-up question, because there is a multiverse with at least 7 worlds yet undiscovered, do you think this leaves any room to restart Planetary under a different writer and include it within the DC multiverse in the same way that Wildstorm was included into the DC universe with the Wildcats characters?
I mean, I sincerely doubt it. I mean, I absolutely doubt that that would ever happen. Because I mean, those I think those 7 worlds are supposed to be sort of a we don't want to map out everything. So just in case we need to put something else, here's sort of our Deus Ex Machina to include whatever thing that we want to include later on. Like, I don't really think that they have a plan for any of those 7 worlds. I think that they're just sort of like their wild cards for whatever they want to do. And I really don't think we'll ever see Planetary ever again. I mean, I could be wrong, but I sincerely doubt we will ever see Elijah Snow in a comic book ever again.
Yeah, it's interesting how you have these extra worlds kind of around, so literally there could be a story where Superman just gets barraged by just titties just everywhere, like hitting him in the face, you know. It's like, how will Superman get out of this jumble? You know,
Super breath.
He's just fighting him, you know, clawing them away from his face, and just he's like, oh no, they're made of red sun yellow radiation. I can't defeat it, you know, and everything. Those were actually all the questions I had.
Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate the multiversity just because it opens up all these different opportunities for these wild stories. So in the same way that Planetary sort of opened up and kind of allowed all these pulp universes to exist in the same creative space, it was sort of my hope that Multiversity would continue that legacy, but with Grant Morrison moving on to Heavy Metal magazine, I'm kind of reluctant to believe that anything will be done with the Multiversity, which is kind of a shame because in the same way that comic books sort of retread old ideas over and over and over again and aren't quite as fresh as they used to be, Multiversity sort of offered up a unique opportunity to kind of continue that sense of discovery of these different universes.
Well, I mean, he is doing I think they might be prose novels. I could be wrong, but he is doing a sequel to Multiversity.
Yeah.
About that.
But you know, and it's like this, is that if DC was really interested in doing like different genres and stuff like that, after Multiversity and after Convergence happened, they had a perfect opportunity to do other genre books like a Shazam book, like a Shazam set in you know the Multiversity Shazam world, and instead what we got was, you know, that they announced 3 titles, and all of them take place in the regular like New 52 verse. You know, one is Lois and Clark, one is that Titans Hunt book, and then the last one is Telos, like the boring villain from Convergence. Like, it made no sense to announce those titles. Like, I was like, when they said there's gonna be three titles coming out of Convergence, I'm like, oh, it's a no-brainer. A Shazam book with, like, you know, Doc Shaner and Jeff Parker, and like surely they'll do that. And then they didn't at all. And so I mean, it's just not going to happen. Like, we're not going to, you know, any genre books in the near future.
I mean, you know, I have a slightly more hopeful take, Cody, which is that
that's weird.
You know, yeah,
I'm the dark one, and you're the one that's like, oh, we're hopeful about it.
Yeah, well, you know, you are known as the Dark Knight of Sequart. You know, you're, you know, not the knight we deserve, but the knight we need.
And I'm the hot one.
That's right. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, I have a slightly more hopeful take, which is, you know, first of all, DC and Marvel will publish what sells. And, you know, like, we'll see more multiversity, you know, anyway. Secondly, like, people thought there was never going to be any more Watchmen. There was never going to be any more Dark Knight Returns. I mean, you know, and yeah, maybe people got it and they decided they didn't want it. But first of all, never say never. Things change. But the other thing is that editorial changes lead to different publications. And, everything you're saying right now is kind of based on the editorial regimes that we have now at DC and Marvel, which, understandably are, massive mass media companies. And, DC is really interested in building the New 52. They probably, only did Multiversity because, it's Grant Morrison and it lets them expand the concept of the multiverse, but they probably don't want to invest in books taking place outside of that. And, we don't know what the deal is with Warren with the Planetary characters, but, never say never. And, if in 10 years it's possible that superheroes aren't even a big genre for Hollywood anymore, which radically changes everything. And, you never know. You could find that some of these independent comics that are non-superheroes are selling really well, and DC and Marvel, being corporations, especially under a new editor, might say, we got to get in on that. So, yeah, I agree with you for the next 5 years, but never say never.
Well, and I mean, I think about like when the New 52 originally launched. The big thing about it was expanding different genres, and so you had sort of like a Wildstorm Edge. It was actually called like DC like Edge, and then there was like you had like All-Star Western, you had like horror books and things like that, and the only book that I can think of going right now that's like an actual genre book in my mind is Prez, because it's a sci-fi book that takes place in the far future. You don't see any mainstream superheroes at all, and they took a huge risk to do Prez and make this like this sci-fi political satire, and it's already gotten canceled by issue 6. Is that it's already finished because sales are no good, and it's not because it's a bad book, because it's a genius book. I mean, it's a super good book, but I think part of the problem is that they're not going to invest into something that is that doesn't sell immediately and doesn't continue to sell very, very well. And then the other problem, and this is going to sound weird, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that we don't have Wizard Magazine anymore. And without Wizard Magazine, because Wizard Magazine was a tastemaker. It really was. Is that I didn't know about Planetary without Wizard Magazine. Like, I mean, the first 12 issues of Planetary had come out. I didn't know what it was, but I read Wizard, and I was like, oh, crap, like, this looks really cool. And if you look at, like, Bleeding Cool, or you look at CBR or Newsarama or anything like that, they're not interested in doing books, in talking about books that are, that are sort of under the radar or anything like that. They're interested in talking about the things that they immediately like, that they already knew that they liked, that are by people who are already sort of name people anyway. I mean, it's just so crazy to think about that Wizard Magazine was as influential as it was, considering it's been dead for so long. But like, they had a featurette. All it said was like, here's like some cool shit that happened in Planetary. These are our favorite moments from Planetary. And I go, oh, all that stuff seems cool. Maybe I should go buy every issue of this. And it was like that got me into it. And I don't see stuff like that anymore. I mean, you'll see like Kickstarter things, and that's about the closest thing to like indie stuff that you can find. But no one does retrospectives like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one thing about that is Planetary was not under the radar for me. I mean, I think Planetary was already selling pretty well by the time Wizard did that. But I mean, I think there's truth to what you say. I mean, and I would maybe say that those sites do cover some stuff that's under the radar, but it's not going to get shared on Reddit. I mean, it's like, I mean, you have examples, like, I mean, Southern Bastards is a counterexample. I mean, a lot of stuff at Image, but like you say, those are already,
Right.
names in the industry. So, I
Right.
mean, it is really hard today to make a splash and have people, really receive it. And I always think back to like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Mm.
Uh, you know, that is a giant franchise. I mean, obviously it's owned by Nickelodeon now, but I mean that is an oddball, bizarre thing to become a giant staple of American pop culture.
Right.
And it was published as an independent black and white comic, of course, kind of during the indie boom of the '80s, but still, I mean, that got found, and I don't know to what degree that's really possible right now.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the closest thing you have is whenever you have like a runaway breakout hit on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
But a good example of that is like Ryan Brown. Like Ryan Brown,
Hmm.
who made God Hates Astronauts.
Hmm.
God Hates Astronauts was a Kickstarter success. His blast furnace like made a ton of money on Kickstarter too, and then it went to single issues on Image, or at Image, and it was canceled by like issue. I don't know. I don't remember. But I mean, he wanted to keep going, but it ended up getting canceled because the sales weren't there. You know.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I'm not gonna say one way or another if it was like, oh, they canceled it prematurely or something. I mean, it stopped being on the top 300 on the Diamond list,
Hmm.
um, and so and again, it's not Planetary. It's a completely different type of book entirely. But
Right.
but that's a good example of how like, you know, here's someone who's a very good artist who has worked really hard, and um, you know, the sales just aren't there, and so you have to wonder, well, where are those sales? Like, where are they missing out at? Like, why aren't people buying that book? You
Yeah,
know?
and that kind of gets at another thing that I've witnessed, which is that you know there's such a big difference between the comic store market
Mhm.
and the Kickstarter market.
Right.
Like or web comics. I mean, you
Right.
can be huge on web comics, huge on Kickstarter,
Mhm.
and you just cannot sell a comic through a comic book store to save your life.
No.
Um, and I don't know if that's a digital divide, if that's just people who, you know, there's a huge fan base, but they're just not going to go into a comic book store and pick up the single issues in big numbers.
Well,
Um, I mean, it does seem like the comic market is kind of dividing into, at least at Marvel and DC, I mean, a kind of more restrictive, in terms of genre of market. Um, Still taking some risks, but I mean, obviously, you and I have our complaints about the new 52. Um, and kind of all the action is over on the Kickstarter side, and on
I think we lost Julian.
He'll come back.
All right.
Whenever this happens, I usually just kind of let it ride.
There you go. Well, and I think going back to what Julian was saying, thinking about like there is a very huge difference between digital, like in terms of like people who consume comics like digitally, and people who go into like a brick and mortar store. Is that I feel like most people that are donating to Kickstarter are people that want something um, that is different, that is beyond just like the typical like superhero books. Um, and that's why Noir City made it, is because people wanted something that was different, that looked
Mhm.
different, that seemed
Yeah.
different. Um, and that's why, in my mind, Ryan Brown made it, and why Martian Comics makes it, and stuff like that. Is that people want something that's different, and and I mean the whole diamond setup anyway is just it's just a mess. I mean the whole thing is just a mess. I mean.
Yeah, don't say that too loud because I already got grilled for my op-ed early this year on why
Oh.
Amazon killed the comic book store.
Oh yeah.
Granted that I wrote it on a lunch break while I was working at a manufacturing plant, so that probably had something to do with it.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I mean, there's considerable. What I keep hearing you guys saying is there's considerable overhead in the creation of comics. I just feel like these wonderful creative projects should just go on a manufacture on demand model, almost sort of like how I completely freaked out when I saw that Justice League Unlimited was coming to Blu-ray, but it's all manufacture on demand. They're waiting for the pre-orders to go up to a certain point where then it would become like monetarily, effective to actually make it, as opposed to just making 5,000 copies of it and hoping someone buys it, which kind of almost reminds me like a Kickstarter model when it comes to like these, classic movies that have been reprinted by Sony or Warner Brothers or something from the Warner Archive, and people want to see this movie. Well, if there's 3,000 people that want to see it, well, we'll manufacture on demand X amount of Blu-ray discs to fulfill that pre-order list. So it seems like DC could theoretically fund some actually like thought-provoking products and interesting series, offer them on a digital-only format, and then see if people want it physically, and then manufacture on demand for that, which kind of fits.
Part of the problem with that is just paying creators at that point, though. Is that if I write a book, if I write a comic, or more importantly, if somebody draws a comic, they're going to want to get paid, and to generate the income to pay that person, you can't do something like a on-demand type thing, and paying them per sale or something like that would never work either, just because like you're not going to make enough money to do that.
The other thing that's interesting there is that I question whether DC or Marvel, despite that everybody wants to, go to DC or Marvel and, write Batman or whatever. I mean, but do they, for all of their marketing power, do they have the ability to really successfully market and make, another genre title or, a kind of really different book successful? And I think that like Vertigo's been a counterexample. I mean, but it's been a long time since Vertigo really led the pack.
Right.
Also, one thing to consider too is the popularity of digital comics, sort of on the rise. I just say this from experience because I really actually prefer physical comics. I can't stand reading them on tablets. However, now that my library has steadily increased over the last few months, I'm finding myself, it's a lot easier to carry a tablet around that has my whole library of comics on it, as opposed to it's almost like carrying like a CD with just one album from one artist, instead of carrying around my iPod, which has like my whole library on it. So there might be some niche market for digital comics, at least in the sense of variety that you can carry around with you on your person.
Yeah, I mean there is, but I mean I think about if you think about the DC books that were directly digital first, and then they started printing them. So you think about like Sensational Comics starring Wonder Woman, or those like Adventures of Superman or Legends of Dark Knight and stuff. All of those, if they really were commercially viable, then they would still be making those books. But I mean, because they're all like $1 a piece. I mean, it's $1 for them, and I was buying a lot of them. Whenever they changed Comixology formats, I stopped buying all that stuff. But anyway, like the whole thing is that like, if Sensation Comic, I mean, if people really wanting to buy digital books and really, really invest in digital-only stuff, then Sensation Comics would have made so much money that they would keep making it right now, So.
Yeah, they're not going to walk away from something profitable. Right. Sorry, my phone kind of, damn Samsung, it tells me the phone is overheating. But we should probably wrap up.
Yeah, so... Is there any concluding thoughts from you guys on the Planetary book, Keeping It Strange?
I mean, ultimately, I think that we put together a book that is a really solid companion to the series. I think it really delves into genre. It delves into like the market that was going on at the time, and I don't know. I think that the form we talk about the form of the single issue arc thing as well, and I think that we could have done more, but I think that what we turned in, I think, is a really solid book. And so, if people haven't checked it out yet, I hope that they do after this, because I think that we put a lot of love into it, and put a lot of diversity into coming up with different perspectives of looking at Planetary. So I hope people check it out.
Well, and I know you really busted your butt on that book, and I mean, I hope people do check it out if they haven't already. Obviously, it's on, in print and on Kindle, and people can get it everywhere. You're also the author of the Anatomy of Zur and Up on Grant Morrison's Batman, which people should check out too, and an upcoming book on Grant Morrison's Action Comics run.
Yeah, definitely. And The Anatomy of Zur and R was read by comic book writer Cullen Bunn, and he says he really likes it. So I got my celebrity plug there.
Well, it's a good book, and we love you, Cody. You're one of the nicest people I've ever known.
Oh, sure.
And, you are a true team player and a true trooper, and, have busted your butt on everything you've ever done. So,
thank you.
I really appreciate you being here, and I hope people check out your work. And I also hope they check out your comic, Noir City.
Yeah, thanks so much. And next month I am doing National Novel Writing Month, so
Sure.
check me out on Popgun Chaos, which is my Twitter page and my website and stuff. So I'll be updating my NaNoWriMo stuff on there. So.
And that's popgunchaos.com.
Yep, that's right.
All right.
Cool.
Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, we love you, and thanks to all our donors who have made this possible and helped make Sequart's work possible. We really appreciate it, and we hope you enjoy these hangouts. And we can't thank you enough. We always value what you've contributed, and we know money's tight, and it means the world to us.
Yep. See you guys later.
Yeah.